We have Emily Taylor, who is Emily Taylor, who is our director for our Peaceful Route, and she has been doing a series on practical peacemaking. And today she is going to talk to us about staying connected with family members when we have difference of ideology and maybe have a conflict there. This is a pre-recorded grow, and so as you see it and wonder where she is, if there's any questions, it'll just be among us in the discussion group, as Emily is not here with us live today. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen and we can get started.
Can help us in a lot of different ways because Hi, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you connecting even with this recorded video for training. The topic that we're covering is staying connected with family when we differ or disagree. And this may be a little bit different approach that I'm going to take this time about thinking of our families like another culture. Say I have an anthropology background and we come in and trying to communicate in one to slow down if needed. A second point is we need to remind others that you want to understand what they're thinking and how they're slow down if needed. And if there's something that's sensitive, don't talk about it in a big group. Ask to speak in private about sensitive topics. So in terms of practical applications, say in a family setting, where do your conversations usually stop or get cut off? My guess is there's a pattern. You probably have lots of different kinds of relationships, but there may be points where you're getting some stickiness. So just to consider, am I getting stopped in the same place each time? this is kind of strange to think about this, but in terms of we always assume like, oh, Americans, or we did in the past, I would say, American culture has certain communication types. That's bifurcated and split off in recent years and months, but there's just some tips. If you are coming into our culture, what would some of the norms have been, or kind of the expectations? So when talking with other people, if you don't understand, it's okay to ask questions. If something is not done correctly, it is okay to speak up about it. We know there's taboo topics and all of that, but generally speaking, those have been norms, long-standing norms in our culture. And then thinking about body language and physical boundaries. That's something in anthropology we talked about a lot. But it is okay in our culture generally to glance at another person, but not necessarily to stare at them. Be kind, but do not touch people without knowing them well. I don't know if any of you have ever had that experience. I had that a lot when I wore my hair really curly. And respecting personal space, arm's length is comfortable. So just a question about that is, what is one thing you could adjust when you're talking with someone who you don't get along with easily? Even the tone of voice, the volume, the distance you stand. It's when we can see ourselves from what I think it's Roger Urey, which he calls from the balcony, to see a little bit more yourself as from a third person position. But again, thinking about your culture and your specific family culture. So just some relationship vocabulary. We definitely need it after having dealt with Facebook for many years now. Our neighbor, it's someone we live close to. Maybe you're not friends or just acquaintances. Again, people coming from other countries come into our culture and they're like, whoa, like I would assume my neighbor would welcome me in and feed me. But in America, like I don't even know who my next door neighbor is, right? So there are different norms in different places, but we have these levels of intimacy. So an acquaintance, maybe a person you know slightly, but who is not a close friend. And a friend, it's a loose word to describe a wide range of closeness in a relationship, generally speaking. But in your life, what do each of those terms mean? How do you gauge that intimacy? And a close friend, it's a person you share a close relationship with, almost like family. Sometimes even closer than family, because we've chosen those people, you know, for particular reasons, instead of just having those bonds naturally come through our family ties. So I only bring up this relationship vocabulary because if you are a person coming into whatever your town is, or maybe your church congregation, considering how are those relationships, what are the levels of intimacy? What are the levels that I share with other people, and how can I navigate those? So again, the question I just brought up, what is my community? Is it my neighbors who live nearby? The families my kids go to school with? My children's teachers and my coworkers, fellow church members, the mailman, the people at the grocery store, the bus driver. In short, do I consider it all of those people that I contact regularly, or is it a smaller circle? So even just learning to define how you see your community, you can relate that to what is my family? What's the proximity? Is it my cousins, my aunts and uncles, or is it just like my husband and my kids? Is it my sisters? So the clearer you are in kind of understanding what layers of intimacy those people, who they are to you in your life, the easier it's going to be with navigating and making decisions about how intimate of topics, or like how far you go into a conflict. So just keep that in mind. So again, I don't mean to patronize in any way, but just going to like, what is a misunderstanding? If it relates back to the communication idea, it's one person sends a message and the other person does not receive the intended message. Sometimes we can be straight out rude, or others can be rude with us, and the intended message is to offend, but oftentimes conflict comes when there's misunderstanding. So the practical application, again, is to think of, are there familiar patterns of misunderstanding with certain people in your life, in my life? And usually we're not in conflict with everybody. There's usually a few, a token, or maybe even one key relationship where misunderstandings keep happening over and over. So instead of repeating the same cycle, getting that distance and trying to figure out, okay, what is it that I'm trying to send out and is not being received? Why do we misunderstand each other? Just like with intercultural communication, we think we speak the same language because maybe we're native English speakers, but how we use our words, why we use our words may be very different depending upon our culture and the values that we've chosen to concentrate on. How often have you been stuck with being caught with a certain facial expression, or your eye contact, body language, tone of voice, hearing abilities, speaking abilities, willingness to share opinions? Maybe I'm less comfortable and you're more comfortable. But if you think about the people that you can talk to easily, so again, not talking about when you get in conflict, but what do you usually share in common with people who you can talk to easily? Is it that you generally have these shared cultural values, or you both grew up the same and you have similar friends and family experiences? Identifying those things that bind can help you then discern in other more difficult relationships, maybe I could go at this from a different angle. Instead of going straight to the issue, I can build a relationship on a different level of commonality. So just keeping that in the back of your mind in terms of family members. In our day and age, oftentimes you live quite distant from close family members, siblings, aunts, uncles, grandparents. So there's an assumed intimacy, but maybe not a lack, but not a lot of interaction recently to be with each other and to communicate easily. We've talked about this before too, defining conflict and contention. Conflict is a situation where the concerns of two or more people are or appear to be incompatible. So perception plays a part in conflict. There really may be value differences, or there's not enough resources to go around, but oftentimes we need to deal with perception as well. We've talked about contention, and that it's when we have hostile feelings about our differences. We perceive difference between us, and oftentimes we weaponize those differences for our gain. What choices do we actually have when we encounter some kind of misunderstanding with each other? We can blame ourselves. Oh, I just need to change, or I did a bad job with that. I've never been good at, having hard communication, like difficult conversations, whatever that is. We can blame other people. It's all their fault. Or we can move in terms of nonviolent communication to sense our own feelings and needs, and then begin to sense others' feelings and needs. Expressing feelings. My guess is if you're around family members who you have known for many, many years, it's almost as if you can anticipate your own feelings and the feelings that they will display. And so it's almost like you're acting out a play. Okay, when she does this, this is how I usually get triggered, and then it spirals like this. You're smarter than that. If you express your true feelings, yes, there has to be some level of intimacy. But if you've expressed yourself in a certain way that doesn't work, that's where maybe you have to do a little more digging. What are my true feelings? How would someone know that that's what I'm really feeling? Have I communicated that in different ways or creative ways? Or am I not really wanting to communicate or express those feelings because that relationship just isn't strong enough yet, right? So the first step to be able to make a connection is to express feelings. So we often use very general words to describe what we're experiencing in terms of emotion: happy, mad, sad. It's when we get beyond those kind of stereotypical generalized feelings that we're allowing others to begin to understand us in a more personalized and intimate way. So I'm frustrated, I'm confused, I'm surprised, I'm astonished, I'm grieved, I'm cranky, I'm hangry, I'm sleepy, I'm overwhelmed. Whatever it is, using more specific words allows others to see a window. Again, you don't necessarily want to overshare, but in times when you do have a moment, particularly in private, group setting can be a lot more, there's a lot more at stake. But using specific words and taking the time beforehand through your own practices of mindfulness and even meditation to understand how you're really feeling. So again, if this is a cultural thing, if you think about your family culture, the good, the bad, the dysfunctional, the functional, what are the cultural expressions of feelings in my family culture? Whether it's my nuclear family with my family of origin or my extended family, how does someone show that they're happy or doing okay in my culture generally? And then how does someone show that they have a problem in my culture? Are there like kind of norms that have developed that are still effective? Maybe they're not authentic me, but they still would allow others to be able to navigate difference with me. And then what can I do to be better understood and to better understand others? Again, that's where your creativity comes in. Your offspring of the most creative beings in the universe. And there's often different ways. And when we're exposed to the ways of others, other cultures, we're like, oh, I never really thought about it doing something that way. Maybe I should try it. So consider your current family culture and then perhaps ways that you could adjust, kind of tweaking slowly, not maybe jumping off whole scale into something else. Ways of expressing feelings that will be understood, if that's really your goal, to be understood and to understand others. So dealing with frustration, all of us have frustration in our family lives, I'm sure. Maybe you guys don't, but I do. So how do people express frustration in your family and within your culture? What's culturally acceptable? Where are we missing the mark? Where are we kind of not allowing people to fully express themselves and work through difficulty? Because sometimes the family culture is, we never talk about stuff like that. So then it never gets resolved. So how can, again, I adjust these things a little bit at a time? So how do you think people show their frustration in other families? If I was doing a cultural study, of the people across the street, when they get mad, because it's usually behind closed doors, do I even know what other options are? And that's, again, where it's through communication and dialogue, we begin to gather ideas for how to adjust in what we do in our own family. So how do you think you could be better understood with your frustrations? Is it not just I am mad or saying I statements? There may be times, people and situations and even like safe spaces, taking a walk. So I'm like walking next to you and I don't have to look directly at you when I hear hard things, and I'm moving along in a rhythmic way, which helps ease my anxiety. But that's where the creativity often comes in. So how are you feeling today? I, originally was thinking, like, I've spoken with groups from other countries, and just simply like, how are you feeling today? Do you like that question? Is it too personal? Does it always seem trite? But if you tried this out, and I think in your native language, how you would usually greet someone, what would you say? How does it usually go? I actually have a habit of when I go like to the grocery store, I actually just say, hey, how's your day going? And I say that because I don't want to say, how are you doing? Because that might be too personal, actually. If the person in front of me has to sit there for 5 to 10 minutes running all my food through the scanner, and I usually strike up a little conversation. These questions were for an intercultural communication thing, but can you do this in English? Meaning, do I have the words to have that conversation in a way that feels like me? And am I being understood by the people that I really care about? What language, how would they say it? Have I observed the other person enough to know how they usually get at the same information, even if what feels natural to me is different? When do I get stuck? Do I feel like people understand me? And what tools do I want to improve? So that first step in nonviolent communication was expressing feelings. And this is, we express feelings when we feel safe enough to at least show a little bit of what we're feeling. And then we share a need. I feel nervous because I need to give a presentation tomorrow on a subject I've never talked about before. For example, tomorrow in class, I'm in a advanced cognitive development class, and I've never had a regular cognitive development class, but I'm giving a presentation as if I'm some kind of expert on it. I feel like I need extra gentle comments or feedback from my class, because I need to know that I'm moving in the right direction, and I don't want to get kind of bullied over with negative feedback right when I'm starting. So I need to do the work to understand my need. Then thinking about again, these are just, in our culture, we tend to ask a lot of questions, and it's assumed it's okay. But instead of assuming the average, which is a lot of what I'm studying in my PhD, where we talk about averages, in my family culture, instead of American culture, do people ask a lot of questions? What kinds of questions are okay? What questions catch people off guard and make them uncomfortable? In our culture, generally, we expect people to expect us to answer their questions. What if I'm not ready to answer that question? Have I even come up with kind of a line or something to say, hey, you know what? I don't know what I think about that right now. Do you mind if I get back to you? And I've rehearsed that response, so I have an exit strategy out of a difficult conversation that I may not be prepared to have yet. Or I could say, you know what? It's really tough for me to talk verbally, just kind of on the fly about these really big topics. Do you mind if I spend a little time writing down some of my thoughts, and then we go on a walk tomorrow and we just share some of our thoughts? Take the time to express yourself in a way that can be understood. So this again, these sound so basic, and I don't mean in any way to make it too simple. But if I was a person coming into your family culture and it's different from mine, how can I make a request so that I know that I'm understanding? Do you ever ask someone to repeat themselves? I don't know if it's like this in your house, but if I ask someone to repeat them, like, hey, I didn't quite hear you, I often get a really brisk response, like, you weren't listening, or why don't you pay more attention, something like that, for my kids. But it's okay generally with adults to say, hey, do you mind repeating what you said one more time? Maybe not slowly, but I'm just hoping to understand better. And then being able to express that you don't understand. Have you ever asked someone for directions and it's super obvious right after you ask them for directions that they have no idea where you need to go, and then you just end up getting some garbage as like directions? So instead of us giving other people garbage when we don't know what we really want to say, just saying, you know, I'm not sure that I understood you. Do you mean X? So make sure we're actually communicating and not creating more misunderstanding by trying to have a conversation. 3 is a little tricky. It sounds like you might be angry. Most people don't want to be evaluated as being angry, but just saying, hey, it sounds like you might be a little frustrated by what I just said. What is it about what I said that's frustrating? And then if they say, I'm not frustrated, be like, oh, okay. Don't start fighting them about how they're feeling. Read between the lines that, okay, like I need to back down. Maybe I need to adjust my volume. Maybe I need to stand back a little bit. Maybe we need to sit down. Maybe we need to go get something to eat, but adjust. Is there something I can help you with? I thought about that so many times with my kids where I feel like I have an answer to what would help them. And the best thing I can do is actually just say, is there anything I can help you with? And sometimes they say yes, sometimes they don't say anything at all, but my availability is put out there. And sometimes if we're with someone who is really feeling frustrated, we can say, what can I do to help you feel understood? Are there things that I could do better? That takes a lot of humility, and it's a little scary sometimes if you're talking with someone who you've had problems with, but pacing out the feedback, or maybe asking specifically for what kind of feedback you want. So maybe the first thing I'm hoping that you'll do, and we're going to talk a lot more about these topics in the months to come, but I want you to notice when you are misunderstood. Like, aside from these 4 steps, what things make you feel like you're not being clear enough? People don't get you. They don't relate to what you're saying. It's almost like you're a foreigner in a strange land. So the first step to being able to communicate is to notice what's not being met for you or for the other person, and then to discover, kind of on a needs basis, what really should be addressed. Instead of addressing everything that's not working, to focus on those key issues. We just covered very few things today, and we'll be talking a lot about other things to come, but I just wanted you to get a feel for, if I was a foreigner traveling in your family land, how would I engage? What works? What doesn't work? What do you have to bring to the table in terms of kind of like cultural offerings, something to add to the mix, to better it, to improve it, so that there is more understanding. So hopefully something here will be helpful to you, but I appreciate the time you spent listening and look forward to talking with you guys live. Thank you so much.
So I hope that you guys enjoyed that as much as I did. And I always really am grateful for these practical peacemaking series that we have. And I love that Emily set us up so that next month when we continue, that we will have something to look forward to, so we can practice and then maybe see how we do when we go over some of the other things for next month. Thank you for joining us today with our Grow, and thank you for being here with MWEG and being members, and we'll see you next week.